I trained him from scratch. Then he told our boss, "She's too soft to lead." That same week, he took over my team. So I printed a full timeline, my ideas, my docs, his Slack messages, copy-pasting it all. Dropped it in the founder's inbox with a sticky note, "Leadership audit." Now he's on leave, and I'm in his office. I joined the company when there were barely a dozen of us. No one had titles that made sense back then. Everyone just did what needed to get done. We didn't have process documents or onboarding checklists. It was chaos most days, but I liked that. I was good at building order out of chaos. My role wasn't clearly defined at the start. I took over operations because no one else was doing it. I built our vendor tracking system in a spreadsheet. I set up the first logistics protocols. I figured out how to scale delivery with a tiny budget and no roadmap. I wrote manuals, made templates, trained the next wave of hires. I did it all while learning as I went and never asked for much. About 3 years in, I was officially given the head of operations title. No pay bump. No announcement. Just a new line under my name in the company directory. I didn't push back. I thought it meant they trusted me. I thought it was a step forward. I didn't know then how invisible you can become once people think you're dependable. A year later, the CEO said we needed to hire more high-potential people. Fresh blood, young energy. That's how Jason got hired. He was straight out of business school. No work experience, but confident. You could tell he was used to being the smartest guy in the room. His resume was shiny. Everyone acted like he was a big deal. I was told to onboard him myself. Show him how we do things. I didn't think twice about it. I'd trained a dozen people by that point. Jason had no real skills when he started. Couldn't navigate our systems. Didn't understand our vendors. Didn't know how to write a usable proposal. I walked him through everything. Sometimes twice. I gave him access to my internal files, decks I had built from scratch, roadmaps I had iterated on for months. I explained why things were the way they were, what had failed before, what worked now, what we were still testing. I gave him context, not just instructions. He was polite at first. Grateful, even. I remember he once said I was a better teacher than any professor he had. That actually meant something to me at the time. He started picking things up fast. Too fast in some ways. At first, I was proud of him. But then I noticed small things that fell off. In one team meeting, he gave a short update that sounded familiar. It took me a minute to realize he had repeated almost word for word what I told him during a one-on-one. It kept happening. He started volunteering to present ideas that I had drafted and shared with him privately. At first I thought, maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe he was just excited. But then I started tracking it. He would bring up strategies, frameworks, and even specific language I had shared. And he never once mentioned where it came from. He stopped asking questions, too. Instead, he started acting like he was the one who came up with the process improvements I had put in place months before he arrived. He would pitch them in meetings like they were new insights. I didn't say anything. I thought maybe it's a phase. Maybe he's trying to prove himself. Maybe I'm being too sensitive. But then he started going around me. He began messaging my direct reports and assigning them work without checking with me. He'd check in on their progress and offer feedback, even though those people didn't report to him. One of my senior analysts came to me confused. Said Jason had called himself co-lead on a project she was running, one that I had personally approved. I confronted him. I asked what he was doing. He gave me a smile and said it must have been a misunderstanding, that he just wanted to be collaborative, that he respected my leadership. I wanted to believe him. I didn't want to create drama. I told him to loop me in next time. He nodded, but the behavior didn't stop. A few weeks later, I was called into a meeting with the CEO and VP of Ops. They said there was going to be a small restructuring. Jason would now be project lead, strategic ops. A newly created role. He'd be taking over a portion of my responsibilities. 3 of my reports would now report to him. The rest of the team structure would be reevaluated over time. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I nodded and left. I sat at my desk and stared at my screen for an hour. Everything I had built was being sliced apart and handed to someone who had been there for less than a year. Someone I had trained. Someone who had never created anything original, just copied and reworded my work. That night, I got a call from a colleague in product. She said she didn't want to stir the pot, but thought I should know. Jason had been in a leadership sink and said I was too soft to lead, that I wasn't scalable, that he had been cleaning up my work. I sat on my floor in the dark for a long time. I felt sick, not just because of what he did, but because I let it happen. I handed him everything and assumed he would respect the hand that helped him. I didn't go to sleep that night. I opened my laptop instead. I started combing through everything: Slack threads, Google Docs, email chains. I pulled timestamps, highlighted places where I had sent him drafts, templates, frameworks, matched them against documents he later presented as his own. I went through weeks of digital trails and built a full timeline. Every deck he presented had origins in my shared folders. Every process he created had been lifted directly from materials I gave him. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I didn't complain. I just built the proof. When I was done, I printed everything. I added color-coded tabs. I labeled each section. I titled it Strategic Operations Development Timeline. I attached a sticky note to the front with 2 words, Leadership Audit. I walked to the founder's office. He wasn't in, so I slid it under the door. I didn't hear anything for 2 days. Then, suddenly, Jason was out of office. No explanation. HR said he was on personal leave. People started whispering. No one knew what was happening. A week later, I got an email from the CEO asking to meet. That meeting changed everything. The meeting with the CEO was cold, professional, rehearsed. He didn't mention the packet I had left, not directly. But I could tell he had read it. His tone was different, measured, careful. He said something vague about realigning leadership structures and how the company had been reevaluating contributions. Then he offered me a new title, Senior Director of Strategic Operations. It wasn't just a title upgrade. It came with a significant bump in pay, plus a seat at the senior leadership table. I asked who I would report to now. He said directly to him. Asked what would happen to Jason's position. The CEO paused, then said they were pausing that role indefinitely. I nodded. I didn't ask anything else. I just said thank you and walked out. The next few days were tense. People could feel something had happened, but no one knew what. Jason hadn't come back. His name was quietly removed from Slack. His office was dark. His inbox was deactivated a week later. HR never sent a memo. It was like he vanished. But the whispers didn't stop. Some people were confused. Others were angry. Jason had built relationships during his climb. He had allies. I saw them watching me in meetings, their faces tight, arms crossed. I knew what they were thinking. They thought I'd backstabbed him. One of my old analysts, someone Jason had gotten close to, submitted her resignation a few weeks later. Said she didn't like how things were being handled. Others didn't say anything, but started pulling away. Suddenly, I wasn't invited to impromptu brainstorms. People hesitated before asking me questions. Some looked at me like I was dangerous. I didn't blame them. No one saw what he did behind the scenes. No one saw the copying, the manipulation, the theft. They just saw someone disappear and me rise right after. The work kept piling up. My new role meant I had to sit in on exec meetings 3 times a week. But I was still patching holes left by Jason's sudden exit. Projects he touched were a mess. Deadlines were missed. Notes were missing. Documentation was sloppy. He had been bluffing through more than I realized. I started staying late again. Hours after the office emptied, I'd sit in his old chair with my laptop open, redoing everything from scratch. I was angry, not just at him, but at myself. I should have seen it earlier. I should have pushed back. One night, around 9 p.m., the founder walked in. He said he'd forgotten his keys. Then he paused, looked at me sitting there, surrounded by files and drafts. He said, "I didn't realize how much he was leaning on your work." I didn't respond. I didn't trust myself to. He nodded and walked out. But the weight didn't go away. About a month after Jason left, I got a message from someone in HR, quiet off the record. They said Jason had filed a complaint before he left. said he was being sabotaged and set up. Claimed I had taken his work and presented it as my own. That was when I realized the fight wasn't over. I was called into a formal meeting with legal and HR a few days later. They said it was routine, just a follow-up due to a previous team member's exit. I knew what it really was. They asked for documentation, timelines, clarifications. I handed them a second packet. Same structure. More tabs. This one included full Slack exports, Google Doc version histories, metadata logs, dates, authorship, edit histories. Everything Jason had claimed was his. I had proof showing the opposite. They asked questions for over an hour. I answered all of them. Calmly. I had nothing to hide. After that, things went quiet again. But now I knew, he didn't just go quietly. He tried to take me down with him. He tried to flip the story. And it almost worked. That's what scared me most. If I hadn't saved everything, if I hadn't kept those files, if I hadn't been paranoid enough to document every request, every handoff, he might have won. The truth wasn't loud. It was buried in timestamps and message logs. And people believe confidence over proof most days. I was still in his office, still in his chair. But I didn't feel like I'd won. Not yet. Because part of me knew people like Jason don't stay gone for long. They wait. And they come back stronger. 3 months passed. Jason didn't come back. But his name did. The startup world is small, especially in our industry. I started hearing from ex-colleagues at other companies, asking questions. One person messaged me on LinkedIn and said, "Hey, didn't you work with Jason? He's up for a senior strategy role here." Seemed familiar. I kept my replies short. We worked together briefly. That was it. I didn't want to go around torching his name. But something about the message bothered me. Then I got another one. This time from a vendor we'd worked with. She said Jason had reached out, pitching himself as a consultant. He was using case studies, my case studies, as examples of what he'd led. I asked her to send me what he'd sent her. She did. I opened the attachment and my heart stopped. It was my exact deck from last year. The one I'd made from scratch, formatted late at night, polished for weeks. Every slide was identical. He had just put his name at the top and changed the footer logo. He was using my work to rebuild himself. I started tracking it. Quietly. I found more. He had launched a consulting website, basic but slick, and was shopping himself around as a strategic growth advisor. He listed our company as one of his past leadership roles. Claimed he scaled operations and led restructuring across core teams. The audacity would have been laughable if it didn't make my stomach turn. I went to our founder, showed him the site, showed him the files. He frowned but said, "If he's not using proprietary data, there's not much we can do." I could tell he didn't want to touch it, so I sat with it again. That quiet, angry feeling, that sense of being used and erased at the same time. A week later, I got another LinkedIn message. This one from someone who used to work with Jason during his MBA internship. She didn't even know me, but she'd found my name on one of the old doc footers he forgot to remove. She said she didn't know what had happened but warned me. "He's telling people you sabotaged him, that you framed him because you saw him as a threat." It hit me hard, because now I saw what he was really doing. He wasn't just moving on. He was rewriting the story. He was painting himself as the victim, and me as the insecure woman who couldn't handle being challenged. And it was working. I could see it in how people hesitated around me at conferences, in how vendors who used to greet me with warmth now just said, "Hope everything's going well," and moved on. That tight, polite tone people use when they don't want to get involved. I started pulling back. I stopped volunteering for big presentations. I let other people speak in meetings. I became quieter, sharper, colder. Not because I wanted to, but because I felt like I had to. Every time I made a decision, I thought about how he'd twist it if he found out. How he'd spin it to someone else. How he'd add it to his version of the story. One night, around 11 p.m., I sat in my car outside the office, just staring at the lights on the top floor. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't even feel angry anymore. Just tired. Exhausted from the invisible war of perception, he was still fighting. But I wasn't going to let him win. Not again. Not quietly. I didn't go after him right away. Instead, I watched. I started collecting his public claims the way I had collected his Slack messages. Every LinkedIn post, every interview blurb, every portfolio deck he sent out. I tracked who followed him, who commented. I made a private spreadsheet. It felt obsessive, but I needed to know how far he was willing to take the lie. Turns out, he was willing to go far. Jason started getting traction. One of our former investors shared his new consulting business on their feed, calling him one of the most strategic minds I've worked with. Another founder reposted his content and tagged him as a must-follow operator. His posts were slick, all buzzwords and polished images. But I saw the roots of every slide. I saw my work. He even reused an image I had drawn by hand in a workshop once, something I'd sketched on a whiteboard during a 10 p.m. strategy session. He'd taken a photo of it, cleaned it up in Illustrator, and now it was part of his growth flywheel model. I stared at that one for a long time. Then I got an invitation to speak at a small industry panel. I almost said no, but something in me shifted. I accepted. When I arrived, I found out Jason was one of the other panelists. No one told me in advance. Maybe they didn't think it mattered. Or maybe they thought I'd be excited to reunite. Either way, there we were, sitting on opposite sides of a long table, mic'd up in front of 100 people. He smiled at me like we were old friends, like none of it had happened. I didn't smile back. During the panel, he talked about rebuilding broken teams and recovering from toxic leadership environments. I could feel the audience nodding along. He said he'd led restructuring during rapid growth and streamlined complex ops with resistance from legacy teams. His words were careful, but the subtext wasn't. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct him. I waited until it was my turn. When they asked how I built trust during scaling, I told the truth. I said trust doesn't come from charisma or fast promotions. It comes from showing your work, owning your mistakes, and never claiming someone else's thinking as your own. I said documentation matters. Attribution matters. Integrity matters. I didn't say his name once. I didn't have to. Afterward, a few people came up to me quietly. One said, "I've heard two very different stories about what happened at your old company. I think I just figured out which one is real." I didn't respond. I just nodded. But something changed that night. I started getting messages. From other women. From former colleagues. People I hadn't heard from in years. They started telling me things. Small things. Moments they'd brushed off. Times Jason had taken credit, misrepresented something, reshaped the narrative. One woman told me he'd once called her too emotional to lead after she pushed back in a meeting. Another said he had used her analysis in a pitch and then cut her out of the follow-up entirely. They had believed it was just them. Isolated events. Now they were seeing it differently. I gathered those stories. Not to use them, but to see the full picture. To stop doubting myself. Then one day, an email landed in my inbox. Subject line: Speaking Inquiry, Global Startup Summit, Lisbon. It was a major conference. International audience. I was shocked they reached out to me. But when I scrolled down to the panel lineup, I saw why. Jason was the keynote speaker. And they were offering me the closing spot, on the same stage, just 2 hours after his talk. The timing wasn't a coincidence. They wanted a story. They wanted the real one. I didn't say yes right away. The email sat in my inbox for 2 days. Part of me was tired. Part of me just wanted to move on. But I also knew this was the one chance I'd never get again. A global summit. A packed hall. An audience full of investors, executives, founders, the exact people he'd spent the last year selling his version of the story to. If I was ever going to reclaim my name, it had to be now. So I said yes. I spent the next month preparing, but not the way he did. I didn't rehearse for applause. I didn't hire a designer to polish my slides. I went back through everything I had built. I reread old emails, found forgotten frameworks, dusted off the workshop notes Jason never even knew existed. I didn't name him once in the talk. I didn't need to. I built my entire presentation around one idea: how quiet work sustains companies more than loud voices ever will. When I landed in Lisbon, the organizers greeted me like a VIP. I saw his face on posters across the venue. His bio was full of exaggerations: scaled operations at a Series B startup, architect of core strategy, turnaround specialist. It was all rooted in my work. I wasn't even angry anymore. I just wanted to end it properly. On the day of his keynote, I stood in the back of the auditorium. He was confident,
Smooth.
charismatic. He talked about grit and leadership. He showed slides full of bullet points and fake case studies.
People clapped.
Some stood up. He walked off stage smiling. He never saw me. 2 hours later, it was my turn. I stepped up quietly. No flashy intro. No hype video.
Just me and my voice.
I started with a single slide, a screenshot of an old Slack message from 4 years ago. It was a simple one, me sending a deck to a junior teammate with a note that said, "Use this as a base, but tweak it. Make it yours." Then I showed what that deck became, how it grew over time, how it evolved through team input, late nights, trial and error. I layered the timeline, showed version histories, not to prove ownership but to show process, real work, real leadership, the kind people don't always notice. I talked about what it feels like to be rewritten. I didn't cry, but my voice cracked once. Just once. And I ended with a single line over a black screen: "The truth doesn't always speak for itself. Sometimes you have to build a stage and give it a mic." The applause didn't come all at once. It started slow. Then people stood. One row, then another. I didn't smile. I just nodded and walked off. Later, at the mixer, a woman from a VC firm pulled me aside. She said, "We used to think Jason was the one to watch. Not anymore." Another man from an accelerator program told me, "Your talk changed the tone of the entire summit." The next day, Jason's name was pulled from the summit's website. A week later, his consulting site went down. 2 weeks after that, a former colleague of his published a blog post. Just the facts. Timestamped docs. Version histories. Evidence of manipulation. More voices started speaking. People who had stayed quiet before. He didn't have enough hands to plug the holes anymore. His narrative collapsed. I didn't post anything. I didn't gloat. I didn't return the messages asking for comments.
But I saw the impact.
I got 3 offers in the weeks after Lisbon. All senior roles. All from companies that had once been connected to him. I didn't take any of them. I stayed where I was. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't need to leave anymore. I had already cleared my name on the biggest stage possible. Jason's LinkedIn went quiet. Last I heard, he moved cities. Tried to start fresh under a new version of the same story. But now there were too many people who knew the real one. People still come to me with questions. About leadership. About betrayal. About building something that lasts. And I tell them this: keep your work. Save the receipts. Don't underestimate quiet power. And when someone tries to erase you, make sure you're still holding the pen.